everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. We're all about helping you learn languages more effectively, and today we're going to be looking at a YouTube video I found super interesting from the Fluent Path.
Oh, yeah. Episode 2 specifically.
Yeah, exactly. So we're all, aiming for fluency, right? And I think this video has some really cool stuff that's not, your typical, memorize these vocabulary words.
Yeah, it kind of turns some of those ideas on their head a little bit. I think you'll find it really interesting.
For sure. So one of the things that really stood out to me right off the bat was this idea that all words are created equal. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because, you think about okay, I need to learn, these big fancy words to sound really fluent, but that's not really what they're saying here.
Yeah, I think instinctively we all kind of feel like we have to, go for those big, impressive words to sound really good in language.
Right, like isochronous versus is, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And, how often do you actually use the word isochronous?
Never. But you use it all the time?
Yeah, it's like one of those words that's so essential.
Yeah.
But it's easy to overlook because it seems so basic.
Totally. And I think that's kind of the point they're making in this video. Don't underestimate the power of those simple building block words.
Yeah, it's like if you ever tried to explain something really simple in your target language, and then you realize, oh, I don't actually know the word for this really basic concept.
Oh, all the time. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. And that's when you realize okay, maybe I need to go back and really solidify my understanding of these really common words.
It's like trying to build a house without knowing how to use a hammer. You need those basic tools.
Exactly. So it's not about just collecting a bunch of fancy words. It's about making sure you have a really strong foundation.
So that's the first kind of mind-blowing idea from this video. And then there's another one that I thought was super interesting, which is about using simple structures. And specifically, they talk about there is, there are. And I'm like, okay, that's beginner stuff, right?
Yeah, it seems that way, right? You learn it in the first few lessons.
Or there's a cat on the couch,
Yeah, but they argue that even intermediate learners often don't fully utilize the potential of the structure.
So it's more than just describing objects then.
Exactly. Think about it. How would you describe the feeling you get when you listen to a really beautiful piece of music in your target language?
That's a good question. I guess I would say something like there is a sense of peace and joy when I listen to that song.
Exactly. You see, you're expressing a complex emotion using that simple structure.
Yeah, it's I never thought about using it that way before.
And that's the beauty of it. Once you master these fundamental building blocks, you can actually communicate so much more than you think.
It's we overcomplicate things sometimes when we don't need to.
Right. And that actually leads us to another really important point that they make in the video, which is about modal verbs.
Modal verbs. Uh-oh.
Have you ever really stopped to think about how important modal verbs are for fluency?
I mean, I know they're important, but honestly, I kind of struggle with them.
Yeah, they can be tricky.
When do I use can versus could, must versus have to?
I totally get it. But they're so powerful because they allow you to express all these subtle nuances of meaning. Intention, possibility, obligation.
So it's not just about getting the grammar right.
No, it's about adding depth and richness to your speech.
Okay, so give me an example.
Okay, so let's take a simple sentence. I go to the store.
Okay, easy.
Now, add a modal verb. I should go to the store. I have to go to the store. I might go to the store.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the meaning changes completely.
Exactly. And that's why mastering modal verbs can make you sound so much more natural and confident because you're able to express yourself with more precision.
I'm starting to see why they call them unsung heroes in the video.
Yeah, they're little words that pack a big punch.
For sure. And I remember they talked about how modal verbs can be especially tricky in their negative form.
Yes, especially with must and have to.
Yeah, that always trips me up. What's the difference between I must not go and I don't have to go?
Okay, so it comes down to prohibition versus lack of necessity.
Yeah.
So must not means something is forbidden, you must not eat that poisonous mushroom.
Right. Good advice.
But don't have to. Simply means there's no obligation. You don't have to wear a hat today if you don't want to.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I was using must not in situations where I should have been using don't have to.
It's a common mistake.
Yeah.
But the more you practice and pay attention to how native speakers use them, the easier it becomes to distinguish between them.
Okay, so we've got all these amazing ideas, right? The power of simple words, the versatility of basic structures, and then these modal verbs that are secret weapons of fluency. But what do we do with all this information?
Well, that's where the 10-minute fluency challenge comes in.
The 10-minute fluency challenge. I love that. Tell me more.
So the idea is that even if you only dedicate 10 minutes a day to focusing on these often overlooked elements, you can make a huge difference in your progress.
10 minutes, I can do that.
Exactly. And it's all about consistency.
Yeah.
Remember the story they told in the video about the Himalayan master?
Oh, yeah. What was it again?
So someone asked him, what's the secret to enlightenment?
Mm.
And he just said, live like an enlightened man.
Oh, wow. So simple, but so powerful.
Right. And it's the same with fluency. It's not enough to just think about these ideas. You have to actually put them into practice.
Okay. I'm ready to take on the challenge. This is so inspiring.
I'm excited for you. I think you're going to be amazed at the results.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great place to pause for now because we've covered a lot of ground already, but we're just getting started. Next time, we'll be back to dive into some really practical tips for actually incorporating these fluency secrets into your daily language practice. So stay tuned. All right, so we're back. And, we've been talking about all these cool ideas from the Fluent Path video about how to boost your fluency. And I'm really curious, okay, how do we actually put these ideas into practice?
Yeah, it's one thing to kind of have those aha moments.
Yeah.
But it's another thing to actually integrate them into your daily language routine.
So where do we start?
Well, I think a good place to start is with that idea of all words being created equal. Remember that. So basically it's about shifting your focus from just chasing those fancy vocabulary words to really mastering those common everyday words.
So it's like building a solid foundation before you start adding all the bells and whistles.
Exactly. And that means really resisting the temptation to jump ahead. Don't worry about those advanced vocabulary lists just yet.
So instead of just memorizing lists of words, how can we really internalize them and make them part of our active vocabulary?
Well, think about it. How did you learn new words in your native language?
Yeah.
You didn't just sit down with a dictionary.
No, I guess it was more through conversations and, just hearing them used in different contexts.
Exactly. And you can apply that same principle to your target language.
So it's like immersion then.
Yeah, exactly. Try to create opportunities to hear and use those basic words as much as possible. Write simple sentences, think to yourself in your target language, even try having basic conversations using just those common words.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about we talked about how it's more than just describing objects, so how can we use that more creatively?
Well, let's think about your target language for a second.
Yeah.
What are some things that you find particularly interesting about the culture or the country itself?
Well, I'm learning Spanish, and I'm really fascinated by the history, all the different empires and kingdoms that have influenced Spain.
Perfect. So how could you use their peers to express that fascination?
Well, I could say something there is a deep sense of history in Spain. Everywhere you go, you can feel the layers of the past.
Exactly. You see, you're using that simple structure to convey a much richer idea.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel forced or unnatural.
Right. And that's the goal. You want to start thinking in your target language as naturally as possible.
Okay, so we've got the simple words we've got there are now, let's talk about modal verbs, because those are the ones that I'm always oh.
I know they can be tricky, but they're so worth mastering because they add so much nuance to your speech.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Well, I would say the first step is to familiarize yourself with the most common modal verbs in your target language. Do a little research, find out which ones are used most frequently, and then start paying attention to how native speakers use them.
So it's observation as much as memorization.
Absolutely. Think of it as eavesdropping on fluency secrets.
Yeah.
Watch movies, listen to music, read books, and try to notice how modal verbs are used to express different shades of meaning.
I like that eavesdropping on fluency secrets. That's a good one.
And then, of course, you have to practice using them yourself. Try to incorporate them into your writing and speaking as much as possible.
And what about those times when the differences between the modal verbs seem really subtle, must not versus don't have to. Any tips for mastering those nuances?
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing that can help is to create your own examples. Think about your daily routine and try to come up with sentences using both must not and don't have to.
Okay, so I must not forget to set my alarm tonight because I have an early meeting tomorrow.
Perfect. And how about don't have to?
Let's see. I don't have to wear a suit to the meeting because it's casual Friday.
There you go. You're getting it.
It's the more I practice, the more those subtle differences start to become clear.
And that's the key. With anything in language learning, the more you expose yourself to it, the more it will start to click.
This is making me realize how much I've been underestimating these little details. you know?
Yeah, they might seem small, but they can make a huge difference in how fluent and confident you sound. It's all about layering those building blocks one on top of the other.
Speaking of building blocks, how do we stay consistent with that 10-minute fluency challenge? Life gets so busy, it's easy to let things slide.
It's true, but I think the key is to find ways to make it fit into your existing routine. Think about those little pockets of time you have throughout the day, like your
Yeah.
commute, your lunch break, even while you're waiting in line at the store.
Oh, yeah, like those in-between moments.
Exactly. And another thing that can help is to make it fun. If you're dreading those 10 minutes, you're less likely to stick with it.
So how do we make it fun?
Well, what are some of your hobbies or interests?
Hmm. I like listening to podcasts. I like trying new recipes, and I also enjoy hiking and being outdoors.
Perfect. There you go. Find podcasts in your target language. Look up recipes from countries where your target language is spoken. Maybe listen to nature documentaries narrated in your target language.
I love those ideas. It's like sneaking in language learning without even realizing it.
Exactly. And the more you can integrate your target language into your daily life, the more natural and effortless it will become.
This is so helpful. We've covered a lot of ground today, from mastering those basic words to wielding the power of modal verbs. But I'm curious, what about those times when we hit a plateau or feel like we're not making progress? Any advice for getting unstuck?
That's a great question, and it's something that every language learner experiences at some point. But don't worry, we're going to dive into some strategies for overcoming those challenges and keeping your motivation high in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm really excited to keep exploring these fluency secrets with you. It's like we're uncovering all these hidden pathways to language mastery.
I love that analogy, and sometimes those pathways can lead us to some unexpected challenges like we were talking about before. What happens when we hit a plateau or, start to feel like we're not making as much progress?
Yeah, exactly. It can be so discouraging to put in all that effort and then feel like you're stuck in a rut.
Yeah, I totally get it. But, one thing that the video really emphasized was this idea that language learning is a journey, not a race.
That's a good point.
There are going to be times when you feel like you're soaring ahead, and then there are going to be times when you feel like you're trudging uphill.
And that's normal.
Totally normal.
Mm.
It's all part of the process. I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves, like we have to be making constant progress.
Yeah, it's like that instant gratification mentality,
Exactly. But fluency doesn't work like that. It's a lifelong pursuit. It's about embracing the process and finding joy in those small victories along the way.
So how can we shift our mindset to be more accepting of those ups and downs?
Well, I think it helps to remember that learning any new skill takes time and patience. Think about like learning to play an instrument or a new sport. Did you become an expert overnight?
Oh, definitely not. There's a lot of frustration along the way.
Exactly. And language learning is the same. It's about trusting the process and celebrating those small wins. Every time you understand a new word or use a grammar structure correctly or have a conversation in your target language, that's a win.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget about all those little steps along the way.
Exactly. And those little steps are what add up to fluency over time, so don't discount them.
So what about those times when we feel completely stuck, like we're just not making any headway? What are some practical strategies for getting unstuck?
One thing that can be really helpful is to revisit your why. Why are you learning this language? What are your goals for yourself? Sometimes just reconnecting with that sense of purpose can reignite your passion and give you the motivation to keep going.
Yeah, sometimes we get so focused on the mechanics of learning that we forget about the bigger picture.
And another strategy that can be really effective is to shake things up. If your current study routine is feeling stale, try something new. Maybe find a language partner, join a conversation group, or even immerse yourself in a movie or TV show in your target language.
Oh, I love that variety is the spice of life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can also be the spark that re-energizes your language learning journey. So don't be afraid to experiment and find what works best for you.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. We've learned so much about the power of simple words and the importance of mastering basic structures and, of course, those magical modal verbs. But I think even more importantly, we've gained a new perspective on the language learning process itself.
Yeah, it's not just about memorizing rules and vocabulary. It's about embracing the journey and celebrating the small wins and finding joy in the process of discovery.
So beautifully said. I think this deep dive has given us all a renewed sense of enthusiasm and inspiration to keep pursuing our language learning goals. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap up?
I would just say remember that loving a language is a gift you give yourself. It opens up so many doors to new cultures and new perspectives and new ways of seeing the world. So embrace the adventure, be patient with yourself, and never stop exploring the beauty of language.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights with us.
It's been my pleasure. Happy language learning, everyone.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these surprising and actionable tips for language learning. Remember, fluency is within your reach. Just take it one step at a time, enjoy the journey, and never stop learning.